Within the last half hour, we have received an update on COVID-19 in Georgia from Governor Kemp.
Some of you may have watched that news conference live here at the top of our hour. Jennifer Bellamy now joins us with what we learned from the governor's office. I think the numbers really are the most important highlight here.
That's exactly right, Cheryl. Governor Kemp gave us updated numbers and a breakdown of the confirmed and presumptive positive cases in our state. Right now, we are still at 6 confirmed cases, 1 each in Floyd, Cobb, and Polk counties, and 3 in Fulton. 2 of those Fulton cases are the first that were reported in the state, with family members isolated at home after 1 person traveled to Italy. The source of the 3rd person is unknown, with that person having been hospitalized. The people in Floyd and Polk counties have both been hospitalized as well, and it's not known how they may have got the virus. The person in Cobb County who tested positive is in isolation at home after traveling to Italy. Georgia also now has 7 presumptive cases pending confirmation, 2 in Cobb County, 3 in Fulton, and 1 each in Gwinnett and Cherokee counties. Now, Governor Kemp says one of those cases is a person from South Korea who started exhibiting symptoms over the weekend and is now in a hospital in Fulton County. It's not clear if that person was showing symptoms when they began their travel through Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, where symptoms were noticed by officials. A translator was needed to assist with communication, and officials are now working to figure out the person's exposure. Governor Kemp said national messaging is beginning to change and encourage people to be especially mindful of those who are elderly or may have chronic conditions.
I can say with certainty that in this process, this particular employee had a lot of contact with students that he's or she serves, and also with additional staff members.
And that, again, was the superintendent of Fulton County Schools who announced an employee had tested positive for coronavirus earlier in the day. Governor Kemp, though, says that we are not yet to the point of canceling large events, but they are asking people to follow guidelines from medical professionals during this time.